The briefing room at the Naval Special Warfare Center in Coronado smelled like ambition and air conditioning. 22 Navy SEAL candidates sat in tiered rows, their uniforms crisp enough to cut paper, their bodies sculpted from 2 years of punishment that would have broken ordinary men. The youngest was 21. The oldest was 28. Every single one of them believed they were immortal. At the front of the room, the digital screens displayed satellite imagery of training zones. The temperature held steady at 68 degrees, a technological cocoon that kept the brutal San Diego sun at bay. On the wall behind the podium, black letters spelled out the ethos that had become their religion. The only easy day was yesterday. They had earned the right to be here. They had survived Hell Week. They had mastered advanced tactics. They could operate drones, handle encrypted communications, and breach doors with ballistic precision. They were the new breed, faster, stronger, better educated than any generation before them. And they knew it. In the back row, Brecken Hastings leaned back in his chair with the easy confidence of a man who had never truly failed at anything. 23 years old, 6'2", 210 pounds of optimized muscle built in CrossFit gyms and fueled by protein science. He had graduated top of his BUD/S class with scores that made instructors shake their heads in disbelief. His rifle qualification was perfect. His tactical assessments were textbook. His leadership reviews called him exceptional. Breck was exceptional, and he made sure everyone knew it. "Another guest instructor," he muttered to the man beside him, loud enough to carry 3 rows forward. "Probably some consultant who's going to tell us about resilience or mindset or some TED Talk garbage." A few guys chuckled. Breck fed on it. The morning had started with a briefing about advanced reconnaissance technology, satellite integration, AI-assisted targeting, real-time battlefield data fed directly to helmet displays. The future of warfare presented in 4-color graphs and confident predictions. These young men had trained with tools their fathers could never have imagined. They felt invincible because, in many ways, they were. Then the door opened. The woman who walked in did not look like a warrior. She looked like someone's grandmother who had taken a wrong turn on the way to a garage sale. Eleanor Vaughn was 58 years old, and she wore every one of those years on her face. Her hair was silver gray, cut military short, but softened by time. Her build was lean, but not in the sculpted way of the men in the room. This was the leanness of someone who had simply burned too much fuel over too many years. She wore black tactical pants and a simple black t-shirt that exposed her arms. And her arms told a story that made several of the candidates sit up straighter. Tattoos covered both forearms. Not the artistic sleeve work you see on Instagram, all geometric patterns and watercolor effects. These were old, faded, dark ink that had blurred at the edges, creating a chaotic patchwork that looked more like a map of scars than deliberate art. A candle, an hourglass, coordinates, a large X on her left shoulder blade that was visible when she moved. Other shapes that were harder to decipher from a distance. She carried an old M40A3 rifle in one hand and a paper coffee cup in the other. No laptop, no PowerPoint clicker, no stack of manuals, just the rifle and the coffee and a presence that seemed to pull all the oxygen out of the room. Eleanor walked to the podium with a slight limp favoring her left side. She didn't try to hide it. She set the coffee down and placed the rifle carefully against the edge of the desk. Then she turned to face the class and stood there, silent. 90 seconds of absolute silence. Her eyes were pale gray like winter skies seen through smoke. They moved across the room in a pattern that felt less like looking and more like targeting. Row by row, face by face. Not aggressive, not friendly, just methodical. Some of the candidates shifted in their seats. A few glanced at each other, uncertain. Breck Hastings crossed his arms and smirked. Finally, Eleanor spoke. Her voice was quiet. Not weak, but quiet in the way that forced you to lean forward to hear it. Like gravel rolling through water. "Good morning," a few scattered responses. "Good morning, ma'am." She nodded once, then returned to silence. The air conditioning hummed. Someone coughed. The digital screens flickered through their automated cycle. Brecken Hastings had never been good with silence. He thrived on momentum, on filling space with his personality. The quiet stretched out like a challenge, and Breck had never backed down from a challenge in his life. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk in front of him. The movement drew eyes. He liked that. "Ma'am," he said, his voice carrying that particular edge of respectful disrespect that young men have perfected. "If you don't mind me asking." Eleanor's eyes found him, locked on, no expression. "Why so many tattoos?" Breck continued. The smirk was audible in his voice. "Did you run out of scrapbook pages or something?" The room rippled with nervous laughter. A few guys grinned. One or two looked uncomfortable, sensing something Breck had missed. Eleanor Vaughn did not flinch. She did not look offended. She simply stood there, holding his gaze, and took a slow sip of her coffee. The silence that followed was different now, heavier. She set the cup down with care, the kind of deliberate movement that combat veterans develop when they've had to stay quiet for days at a time. Then she stepped away from the podium and walked down the center aisle, moving closer to the rows of candidates. As she approached, the men could see more detail. The tattoos weren't just faded. Beneath them were ridges, burn scars, surgical scars. The ink had been used to color over damage to turn trauma into something deliberate. Eleanor stopped 3 feet from Brecken Hastings. He sat up straighter, his confidence flickering for just a moment as he realized her eyes were completely calm. Not angry, not hurt, just observing him the way a scientist observes a specimen. "You like the artwork, son?" she asked. Breck shrugged, playing to the crowd. "Just curious, ma'am. Usually we keep things professional. That looks chaotic, like a scrapbook with no order." Eleanor nodded slowly. "Chaotic," she repeated, tasting the word. "That's accurate. War is chaotic. You boys train for the grid. You train for the plan, but contact is the first casualty of planning." She gestured to her left forearm, where a simple candle was tattooed in black ink, its flame elongated and wavering. "Each one of these is a receipt," Eleanor said. Her voice remained quiet, but now it filled the room completely. "A receipt for a life I lived. A death I dodged. A mistake I made. Or a person I couldn't save." Breck's smirk faded slightly. Around the room, the atmosphere shifted. "You want to know about the scrapbook?" Eleanor continued. "I'll tell you about 6 pages, 6 stories. Then we're going to the range and we're going to shoot. You with your AI-powered optics and ballistic computers. Me with this." She gestured to the M40A3 rifle. "This rifle is 30 years old. It has no batteries, no Wi-Fi, no predictive algorithms. And at the end of today, we're going to find out if your technology can beat my experience." The door at the back of the room opened. Every candidate automatically stood, snapping to attention. Commander Miles Ashford walked in, his dress whites immaculate, his bearing carrying the weight of command. "At ease," Ashford said. "Sit down." The men sat. Ashford walked to the front of the room, but he didn't look at them. He looked at Eleanor, and his face broke into something rare on a commander's features. Reverence. He extended his hand. "Elle," he said warmly, "I wasn't sure you'd actually come." "I said I would, Miles," Eleanor replied, shaking his hand with a grip that made the commander wince slightly. Ashford turned to face the class. He saw the confusion. He saw Breck Hastings looking at the floor, beginning to understand he had made a mistake. "Gentlemen," Ashford said, "and lady." He nodded to the one female SEAL candidate in the room, a 26-year-old woman named Ainsley Hartwell, who sat in the front row taking notes with mechanical precision. "You are looking at a legend," Ashford continued. "Eleanor Vaughn, first female Marine to graduate Scout Sniper School. That was 1991, before half of you were born. 89 confirmed kills across a 33-year career. Served in Lebanon, Desert Storm, Somalia, Iraq, Afghanistan. She founded the Tactical Fundamentals program you studied last month, though most of you didn't know it." The room went completely still. Even the air conditioning seemed quieter. Ashford looked at Eleanor's arms. "Those tattoos are a map of what sacrifice actually looks like when you strip away the Hollywood version. I asked her here today not to teach you how to shoot. You already know how to shoot. I asked her here to teach you how to endure, because the batteries die. The satellites go down, the AI makes mistakes, and when that happens, all you have left is what's in here." He tapped his chest. "And who's standing next to you?" Ashford nodded once to Eleanor and stepped to the side, relinquishing the floor. The hierarchy was clear. In this room, the commander was in charge, but Eleanor Vaughn was the master. She walked back to the podium, picked up her coffee, looked at Brecken Hastings one more time. "Stand up, son," she said. Breck stood, his face flushed. "What's your name?" "Brecken Hastings, ma'am." "Well, Brecken Hastings, you asked a fair question. We judge what we see. It's human nature, but in this line of work, judgment without information gets people killed. You looked at me and saw an old woman with messy ink. That's fine. Today you're going to look deeper." She gestured to the candle tattoo on her left wrist. "Story number 1, Eleanor said. Lebanon, 1983. I was 15 years old." Ainsley Hartwell's pen stopped moving. Someone in the back whispered, 15. Eleanor smiled, but there was no humor in it. "I lied about my age. Fake ID said I was 18. I wanted to serve. Marines took me. Officially, I was a communications specialist. Unofficially, there was a program, not sanctioned, not public, training women as snipers before it was legal to do so. She rolled her wrist, letting the light catch the candle flame. October 23rd, 1983. Beirut, the Marine barracks. Most of you have heard of the bombing. 241 Marines killed when a truck loaded with explosives drove into the compound. The room was silent now, the kind of silence that comes when men realize they're hearing something sacred. I was on guard duty that morning, Eleanor continued. Her voice remained level, factual, but something underneath it trembled like a fault line under pressure. 4 a.m. shift, I had the North Post. I saw the truck coming. Yellow Mercedes. Moving too fast for early morning. The driver's eyes were wrong. I could see it even from 200 yards. His eyes were already dead. She paused, took a breath. The rules of engagement said I couldn't fire unless fired upon. There was no active threat, just a truck moving fast. My spotter, a corporal named Davies, he saw it too. He said, "Something's wrong." I had my rifle up. I had the shot. Center mass on the driver, easy. 200 yards, no wind-stable platform. Eleanor's hand moved to the candle tattoo, her fingers tracing it unconsciously. I radioed it in, requested permission to engage. The response took 18 seconds. 18 seconds. The answer was negative, no active threat. Do not engage. The truck kept coming. I watched it drive through the barriers like they were made of paper. Watched it crash into the building. Then the world turned white. Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. The explosion was so big, it registered as an earthquake on seismographs in Italy. I was far enough away to survive. 241 men weren't. I could have stopped it. I had the shot. I didn't take it. Eleanor looked up at the class. Several of the young men were staring at her with wide eyes. "This candle," she said, tapping the tattoo. "I got it 3 weeks later. A flame for every life. I can't draw 241 flames, so I drew one. And I promised myself that if I ever had that moment again, the moment where the rules said wait, but my gut said shoot, I would trust my gut." She paused, letting it sink in. "Lesson number 1, Eleanor said, rules exist for good reasons. Most of the time you follow them. But when you have the experience to know better, when every instinct screams that something is wrong, you have to be willing to break the rules to save lives. That discernment comes from years. It comes from mistakes. And it comes from carrying the weight of the times you didn't act." Brecken Hastings sat down slowly. His face had gone from red to pale. Eleanor took another sip of coffee. "Story number 2, she said. She rolled up her right sleeve, exposing her forearm more fully. An hourglass was tattooed there, the sand appearing to flow from top to bottom in careful detail. Desert Storm, 1991. I was 23 years old, finally official. First female Marine Scout sniper to complete the course. They didn't know what to do with me. Some officers wanted me in public affairs doing interviews about breaking barriers. I told them I wanted to shoot. A few of the candidates smiled at that. They put me with Second Force Reconnaissance, Iraqi Desert. Our mission was to identify and eliminate Iraqi sniper teams that were pinning down coalition forces during the ground push. Intelligence said there was a particular shooter operating out of an abandoned oil facility 30 miles behind enemy lines. He'd killed 7 coalition soldiers in 4 days. Always one shot, always a kill, always disappeared before air support could respond. Eleanor's fingers traced the hourglass. We inserted at night. Helicopter dropped 2 clicks from the target. The plan was to observe, identify, eliminate, and extract within 12 hours. I set up on a ridge overlooking the facility. My spotter was a sergeant named Kowalski. Good man, patient. We settled into position at 0300 hours. She paused for effect. We stayed there for 47 hours. Someone in the back row inhaled sharply. 47 hours, Eleanor repeated. The temperature during the day reached 130 degrees Fahrenheit. We had brought water for 12 hours. We ran out on hour 15. The Iraqi sniper was good. He knew we were looking for him, so he waited. And we had to wait longer. Eleanor's eyes went distant, seeing something the men in the room couldn't. Hour 20, I started hallucinating. Saw my mother walking across the sand. Hour 35, Kowalski was whispering to people who weren't there. We were cooking inside our own gear. The heat was so intense that the rifle barrel was too hot to touch. We wrapped it in cloth soaked with our own urine to cool it down. Ainsley Hartwell was writing furiously, her face intense. But we held the position, Eleanor continued, because young snipers want the shot. They want the action, the validation, the confirmation. Veteran snipers understand that patience is the weapon. The willingness to suffer longer than the enemy can hide, that's what wins. She tapped the hourglass. Hour 47, the Iraqi sniper finally moved. 3 seconds of exposure as he repositioned from one window to another. 3 seconds. Kowalski called it. I took the shot. 1 round. Center mass, confirmed kill. Eleanor's voice softened. This hourglass reminds me that time is a weapon. Discomfort is temporary. Mission success is permanent. You boys have the best gear in the world. Climate-controlled suits, hydration packs, satellite cooling systems. That's good. Use them, but understand that gear fails. Batteries die. And when they do, all you have left is your willingness to endure 1 more hour than the enemy expects. She looked directly at Brecken Hastings. Lesson number 2. Patience outlasts technology. The human ability to suffer, to hold position, to wait, when every cell in your body is screaming to move, that cannot be downloaded, that cannot be automated. That comes from choosing every single minute to stay. The room sat in absolute stillness. Several of the candidates were leaning forward, completely absorbed. Eleanor started to roll her sleeve down when a voice from the middle row spoke up. Ma'am, a young man stood, 24 years old, lean build, dark hair, his name tape read Wolf. His eyes were red-rimmed like he hadn't slept well in a long time. Yes, Eleanor said. Garrett Wolf, ma'am. His voice was tight, controlled. I need to ask you something. Eleanor nodded. Go ahead. Did you serve with Captain Caleb Wolf, Afghanistan 2011, Kunar Province? The air in the room changed instantly. Eleanor's posture shifted almost imperceptibly, like a gun being brought to condition one. Yes, she said quietly. I did. Garrett Wolf's hands were shaking. He was my brother. Eleanor's face showed the first real emotion since she'd walked in. Pain, recognition, and something deeper. Something that looked like guilt. I know, she said. You have his eyes. The silence that followed was enormous. Commander Ashford stood straighter, his own face pale. Ainsley Hartwell had stopped writing entirely, her pen frozen above the paper. Garrett's voice cracked. He died on February 14th, 2011. Valentine's Day, Taliban ambush. He was 28 years old. I was 13 when I got the news. Eleanor nodded slowly. He saved my life that day. The words landed like artillery. Garrett sat down hard as if his legs had given out. Several candidates turned to look at him. One reached out to steady him. Eleanor set her coffee cup down carefully. When she spoke again, her voice was different, softer, more raw. Story number 5 was going to be Afghanistan, the impossible shot. The day the computer said it couldn't be done, and I did it anyway. She looked at Garrett. That's the day your brother died, but I think maybe we need to talk about that one differently than I planned. She walked down the aisle again, this time, moving toward Garrett. She reached into her pocket and pulled out something small. A chain. Dog tags. Eleanor stood in front of Garrett Wolf and held out her hand. The tags read, Wolf Caleb D. I've carried these for 13 years, Eleanor said. I was waiting for the right moment to give them to his family. I called your parents twice, couldn't find the words, but now you're here. And maybe that's not coincidence. Garrett took the tags with shaking hands. He held them against his chest and closed his eyes. Your brother saw the target before he died, Eleanor said quietly. Taliban sniper in a church tower 1,723 yards out. Caleb called the wind, called the distance, marked the target. Then the ambush came from 3 sides at once. Caleb threw himself between me and a grenade. Garrett was crying now, silent tears running down his face. He looked at me, Eleanor continued, made eye contact, smiled, and jumped. I see that smile every single night before I sleep. The room was absolutely silent. Several of the candidates had tears in their own eyes now. Brecken Hastings was staring at his hands. Eleanor reached out and gripped Garrett's shoulder. He was the bravest man I ever served with. And the shot I made after he died, the one that got the sniper who killed 2 of our Marines, I made it because Caleb gave me the data I needed with his last breath. That's brotherhood. That's what this job really is. She stepped back, giving Garrett space. Commander Ashford cleared his throat. We'll take a 15-minute break, he said. His voice was rough. Reconvene at 1100 hours. The candidates stood and filed out quietly. Several stopped to grip Garrett's shoulder as they passed. Ainsley Hartwell approached Eleanor and stood there for a moment, clearly wanting to say something, but unable to find words. Finally, Ainsley spoke. Ma'am, I joined the SEALs because I read about you. 2012 interview in Marine Corps Times. You said competence earns respect. Everything else is noise. That quote changed my life. Eleanor looked at the young woman with something like recognition. What's your name? Ainsley Hartwell, ma'am. You're the only woman in this class, Ainsley. Yes, ma'am. Eleanor nodded. Then you've already learned more about patience than most of these boys ever will. She glanced toward the door where the candidates had exited. Stay after class today. I want to talk to you about something. Yes, ma'am. As the room emptied, only Eleanor, Commander Ashford, and Garrett Wolfe remained. Garrett was still holding the dog tags, his face wet. Eleanor sat down heavily in one of the chairs, suddenly looking every one of her 58 years. You okay to continue? Ashford asked quietly. Yes, Eleanor said. This is why I came back, Miles. These kids. They need to know the cost before they pay it. She looked at Garrett. You okay, son? Garrett nodded. Thank you, he managed. Thank you for bringing him back. Eleanor's smile was sad. He never left Garrett. Men like Caleb, they're in everything we do. Every lesson, every shot, every decision. That's the real memorial. The 15 minutes passed. The candidates filed back in quieter now. The energy had changed. They looked at Eleanor differently, not as an old woman with strange tattoos, as something else, something that commanded respect without demanding it. Eleanor stood and returned to the podium. 4 more stories, she said. Then we shoot. Then you'll understand what these receipts really cost. Brecken Hastings raised his hand. Ma'am, he said. His voice had lost all its earlier bravado. I apologize for what I said earlier. I was wrong. Eleanor looked at him for a long moment, then nodded once. You weren't wrong, Brecken. You just didn't have enough information. That's the condition we're always in, making decisions with incomplete data. The question isn't whether you'll make mistakes. The question is whether you'll learn from them. She gestured to the X-shaped scar visible on her shoulder. Story number 3, she said, is about the biggest mistake I ever made, and the 2 men who died because of it. The class leaned forward, ready now, not just to hear, but to learn. And Eleanor Vaughn, 58 years old, covered in faded receipts from a life spent in service, began to teach. Eleanor rolled her left shoulder forward, and the black t-shirt pulled tight against the large X-shaped scar that dominated her shoulder blade. The tattoo was crude, thick lines that looked like they'd been drawn with a marker rather than a needle. It was the ugliest of all her ink. Somalia, she said. October 1993. Mogadishu. You've all heard of Black Hawk Down. Read the book or seen the movie. What you saw was the Ranger and Delta perspective. I was there too. Scout sniper. Overwatch position on a rooftop near the Olympic Hotel. The candidates shifted in their seats. Mogadishu was legend. The battle that changed modern warfare doctrine. 18 Americans killed. 73 wounded. A city turned into a 360-degree ambush. Our mission was simple, Eleanor continued. Provide precision fire support for the ground elements. Rangers were moving through the streets trying to reach the crash sites. We were supposed to keep them alive from above. She touched the X tattoo, her fingers tracing the rough lines. My spotter that day was a Marine named Chen. Good man, steady hands. We were on our 3rd hour of continuous engagement. Targets everywhere. Militia fighters moving through buildings using civilians as shields, firing from windows and rooftops. The city was burning. Eleanor's voice remained level, but her eyes had gone somewhere else. Somewhere 13 years in the past and 7,000 miles away. A technical that's a pickup truck with a heavy machine gun mounted in the bed was moving south on Hallwood Road. The gun was a .50 caliber Russian DSHK. That gun could tear through armored vehicles. It was headed straight toward a Ranger position. 4 men pinned down behind a burned-out car out of ammunition. If that technical reached them, they were dead. The room was absolutely silent. Even the air conditioning seemed to hold its breath. Chen called it. Range 487 meters. Wind 5 knots quartering from the east. Elevation negative 23 degrees. We were shooting down from the roof. Target the gunner, not the driver. Kill the gunner. The technical stops being a threat. Eleanor's hand dropped from the tattoo. I did the math. Adjusted for wind, adjusted for elevation, checked my data one more time, then I made the shot. She paused, and in that pause, the weight of what was coming settled over the room like a shroud. I missed. The 2 words hung in the air. I calculated the wind wrong. 0.8 degrees, less than 1 degree of error. But at that range, with that angle, 1 degree means 36 inches of deviation. The round missed the gunner by 3 feet and hit the cab of the truck. Eleanor's voice tightened. The driver panicked, swerved, crashed into a building. The building was full of civilians. Women, children. The militia gunner survived and opened fire on the Rangers from the crash position. Killed 2 of them before a Little Bird helicopter took out the technical with rockets. She looked up at the class. Several of the young men were pale. Corporal Martinez and Staff Sergeant Williams, 22 and 29 years old. They died because I made a mistake. Point 0.8 degrees. I went over that calculation 10,000 times. I know exactly where I went wrong. The wind wasn't steady. It was gusting. I took the shot between gusts instead of during one. Rookie mistake. I knew better. But I was rushed. I was tired. And 2 men died. Eleanor turned and lifted her shirt slightly, exposing the full X scar on her shoulder blade. 3 hours later, we were still on that roof. Militia hit us with an RPG. Didn't get a direct hit, but the shrapnel tore through my left side. 11 pieces of metal. They had to dig them out in a field hospital. The X-shaped scar tissue formed naturally. I tattooed over it 2 years later. She lowered her shirt and turned back to face them. This X isn't a victory mark. It's not a badge of honor. It's a reminder that perfection is a lie. No matter how good you are, no matter how much you train, you will make mistakes. People will die because of those mistakes. The question is whether you learn from them or whether you let them destroy you. Brecken Hastings raised his hand slowly. Ma'am, how do you live with that? Eleanor looked at him for a long moment. You carry it every day. It makes you better if you let it. Chen, my spotter, he said something to me on the helicopter out of Mogadishu. He said the shot you make tomorrow will be perfect because of the shot you missed today. He was right. I never made that wind calculation mistake again. She paused, then added quietly, but I'd give anything to have those 2 men back. Ainsley Hartwell spoke up from the front row. Ma'am, when did you stop blaming yourself? I didn't, Eleanor said simply. I learned to use the guilt as fuel instead of poison. There's a difference. Commander Ashford checked his watch. You want to break? No, Eleanor said. We keep going. Story 4. She rolled up her right sleeve fully now, exposing her forearm. On the inner wrist, barely visible, unless you were close, were 2 small footprints. They looked like a child's footprints, delicate and precise. Quantico, Virginia, Eleanor said. 2001. I was 33 years old. The Marine Corps didn't quite know what to do with a female scout sniper. I'd proven myself in combat. Desert Storm, Mogadishu, a dozen smaller operations you've never heard of. But the Corps is traditional, old school. There was resistance to women in combat roles, especially in the sniper community. Several of the male candidates looked uncomfortable. Ainsley Hartwell's expression remained neutral, but her eyes were sharp. So they made me an instructor, Eleanor continued. Scout sniper school at Quantico. If I couldn't be in the field, I could train the next generation. At first, I hated it. I wanted to be operational. I wanted the mission. Teaching felt like a demotion. She smiled slightly, the first genuine smile since she'd walked into the room. Then I met the worst student I've ever had. Commander Miles Ashford, standing at the back of the room, shifted his weight and looked at the floor. His name was Miles Ashford, Eleanor said, glancing back at him. Lieutenant fresh out of officer training, physically capable, mentally sharp. But he could not shoot to save his life, literally. His groupings looked like shotgun patterns. His wind calls were consistently wrong. His breathing was a disaster. Ashford's face reddened, but he was smiling. Most instructors would have washed him out in week 2, Eleanor continued, but I saw something in him. He didn't give up. Every day, dead last in every drill, and every day he showed up earlier than everyone else, stayed later, asked questions, took notes. He wasn't talented, but he was disciplined. Eleanor touched the footprint tattoo gently. I worked with him after hours, 6 months. Every evening after the regular class was done, we'd go back to the range. I broke down every aspect of shooting into its smallest component. Breathing, trigger squeeze, sight picture, follow through. We rebuilt his technique from the foundation up. She looked at Ashford. Miles, you want to tell them what happened? Ashford stepped forward, his command presence softened by memory. I went from worst in the class to 3rd place overall. Made my first 1,000-yard shot in month 7. Elle stood there and watched me make it, and I swear I've never seen her temper. She was jumping up and down like I'd just won the Super Bowl. The class chuckled. The image of the stoic woman in front of them, jumping and celebrating, was almost impossible to imagine. She told me something that day, Ashford continued. She said talent fades, discipline compounds. You'll outlast every natural shooter in this class because you know how to work. Eleanor nodded. These footprints are from that day. Miles walked to the target to check his grouping. When he came back, his boots left prints in the sand. I took a picture, got the tattoo 3 weeks later. She addressed the class directly now. Lesson number 4. Teaching is legacy. What you pass on outlives you. Miles has trained hundreds of snipers in his career, Those snipers have trained others. The techniques I taught him on those evening sessions have spread through the entire Marine sniper community. I'm 58 years old. My shooting days are numbered. But the knowledge doesn't die with me. It lives in every student. Ainsley Hartwell raised her hand. Ma'am, why is teaching more important than individual achievement? Because individual achievement ends when you do, Eleanor said. Legacy continues. Every one of you in this room is going to retire someday. You're going to get old. Your eyes will fail. Your hands will shake. Your body will betray you. But if you've taught someone, if you've passed on what you learned, then you never really leave the fight. You're just fighting through other hands. She paused, then added, every student is a piece of me walking forward when I'm gone. That's immortality. Not medals, not kill counts, students. The room sat with that for a moment. Eleanor checked her own watch. We're running long. Stories 5 and 6 are connected, so I'm going to move faster. She pulled up her left pant leg, exposing her calf. Tattooed there in precise numbers were GPS coordinates 34.9256 degrees, north 71.5439 degrees east. Afghanistan, Eleanor said, February 14th, 2011, Kunar Province. These coordinates mark the exact position where I took the longest shot of my career. Garrett Wolf sat up straighter, his hand unconsciously moving to his brother's dog tags. We were operating in the mountains, Eleanor continued. Small team, 8 Marines. Our mission was to secure a valley pass and provide overwatch for a convoy moving through. Intelligence said light Taliban presence. Intelligence was wrong. Her voice grew harder. We got hit from 3 sides. Coordinated ambush. They'd been planning it for weeks. One of their shooters was positioned in an old mosque tower, 1,723 yards from our position. He was good. Very good. He'd already killed 2 of our Marines before we even identified his position. Eleanor's eyes found Garrett. One of those Marines was your brother, Garrett. Caleb. He was our forward observer. He saw the muzzle flash from the tower before anyone else, called it out, gave me the range, gave me the wind data. 3 seconds later, he was gone. Garrett's jaw tightened, but he nodded for her to continue. The Taliban shooter fired again. Killed another Marine. We were pinned down. Couldn't move. Couldn't get air support because of weather. It was just us and him, and he had the better position. Eleanor's voice dropped. I set up for the shot. 1,723 yards. That's almost exactly 1 mile. The Army's ballistic computer, the one we'd been issued for testing, I ran the numbers. Wind was variable, gusting between 12 and 18 knots. Temperature was dropping. Barometric pressure was unstable. The computer gave me a solution, but then it flagged a warning, probability of hit 22%. Recommended action. Do not engage. Brecken Hastings leaned forward. You shot anyway. I shot anyway, Eleanor confirmed, because a computer doesn't know how wind feels on your skin. It doesn't account for the way mirage bends at altitude. It can't factor in 30 years of reading conditions that don't fit into algorithms. She touched the coordinate tattoo. I closed my eyes, felt the wind, felt the mountain, used every instinct I'd developed over 3 decades. Then I made the shot. The silence stretched. Center mass, 1 round, the Taliban sniper dropped. Confirmed kill at 1,723 yards with a 30-year-old rifle and iron sights. The computer said it was impossible. I said, watch me. Several candidates actually applauded before catching themselves. But here's the real lesson, Eleanor said, cutting through the moment. It wasn't me who made that shot. It was Caleb. His wind data, his range call, his sacrifice gave me the information I needed. That's why I have these coordinates tattooed. Not because I'm proud of the shot, but because every time I look at them, I remember that brotherhood makes impossible things possible. She looked at Garrett again. Your brother was the bravest man I ever served with, and the smartest. He knew that tower position was death. He called it anyway because it would save the rest of us. That's who Caleb was. Garrett stood up slowly, walked down the aisle, stood in front of Eleanor. For a moment, it looked like he might salute. Instead, he extended his hand. Thank you, he said, for telling me the truth, for bringing him home. Eleanor shook his hand with both of hers. He never left son. Men like Caleb, they're in everything we do. Garrett returned to his seat. The room felt different now, heavier, more real. Eleanor took a long breath. Story 6, she said quietly. This one is harder. She pulled the collar of her t-shirt down slightly, exposing the top of her chest. Tattooed over her hard and delicate cursive script was a single word, home. I retired in 2023, Eleanor said. 33 years of service. I'd done everything. Earned everything, proven everything. I went home to Montana, bought a ranch, thought I'd enjoy the peace. Her voice grew softer. My husband died in 2018, cancer. I have two sons, good men, but they don't understand their mother. They see the PTSD. They see the nightmares. They see a woman who flinches at fireworks and can't watch violent movies. They don't see the warrior. They just see damage. Ainsley Hartwell was writing again, but her eyes were wet. I lived alone on that ranch for 3 years, Eleanor continued. Woke up every morning and asked myself, what's the point? No mission, no purpose. No one needed me. Society looks at a 58-year-old woman and sees someone's grandmother. Someone who should be baking cookies and knitting. They don't see 89 confirmed kills and 33 years of service. She touched the word home over her heart. I became invisible. Not because I was old, but because no one knew how to see me anymore. I was dying inside, not from bullets or shrapnel, from irrelevance. The room was absolutely silent. Several of the younger men looked uncomfortable, confronting perhaps for the first time what awaited them after service. Then Miles called, Eleanor said, glancing at Commander Ashford. Asked if I'd come teach. I said no. He called again, said these kids have all the technology in the world, but they don't have wisdom. They need you. I said no again. He called a third time, said maybe they need you or maybe you need them. Eleanor's voice cracked slightly. That got me, because he was right. I came here because I was dying from invisibility. You see an old woman with faded tattoos. I see receipts from a life that mattered. This word home over my heart, I got it tattooed 6 months ago. It reminds me that home isn't a place. It's purpose. It's being needed. It's knowing that what you have to offer still has value. She looked across the class. After today, I'm starting a program, training female veterans who served as snipers or designated marksmen. Women who retired and found themselves invisible. Women who have knowledge and skill and know where to use it. We're going to teach the next generation. We're going to make sure nothing we learn gets lost. Ainsley Hartwell stood up. Ma'am, I want to be part of that program. When I finish here, I want to help. Eleanor smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. She stepped back from the podium and looked at her watch. It's 11:45, she said. We've been at this for 2 hours. You've heard 6 stories, 6 lessons. Now we're going to see if they mean anything. Commander Ashford stepped forward. The range is set up. Conditions are challenging. Variable wind, moving targets, long distance. Ms. Vaughn has agreed to demonstrate old-school technique against your modern systems. Brecken Hastings raised his hand. Ma'am, with respect, are you sure you want to do this? I mean, no disrespect, but you're... Old Eleanor finished for him. She smiled, and this time there was steel in it. Breck, I'm 58 years old. I've been shooting for 43 years. You've been alive for 23. Let's go find out if experience can beat youth in technology. The class stood and began filing out toward the range. Eleanor gathered her rifle and coffee cup. Ashford approached her quietly. You okay? He asked. No, Eleanor said honestly. Telling those stories never gets easier, but it's necessary. The kids are listening. I know. That's why I came back, Miles. Before I die, I need to know that all of this, she gestured to her tattooed arms, meant something beyond just surviving. It did. It does. Eleanor nodded. Let's go shoot. I've been talking too much. Need to remember if I can still back it up. They walked out into the California sunshine together. The candidates were already gathering at the range-excited energy building. Ainsley Hartwell was explaining something to Garrett Wolfe, who was nodding and looking at his brother's dog tags. Brecken Hastings stood by himself checking his AI-powered rifle. The weapon was beautiful. Carbon fiber stock, digital optics with real-time ballistic calculation, integrated weather sensors, the future of precision shooting. Eleanor's M40A3 looked ancient by comparison. Wood and steel, mechanical scope, no batteries, no Wi-Fi, just iron and glass and the fundamentals of physics. A range officer approached with clipboards. We're set up for 5 stages, distances from 800 to 1,800 yards. Wind is gusting 12 to 20 knots. We've got stationary and moving targets. Best aggregate score wins. Eleanor set her coffee down on a bench and began checking her rifle. Her movements were practiced, economical. She'd done this 10,000 times. The candidates gathered in a semicircle watching. The competition was about to begin. Old versus new. Experience versus technology. Human judgment versus artificial intelligence. Eleanor Vaughn, 58 years old, covered in faded receipts from a lifetime of service, chambered around and settled into position. "Ready when you are, ma'am," the range officer said. Eleanor looked down the scope at a target 800 yards away. The wind was dancing. The mirage was thick. The conditions were terrible. She smiled. "Let's teach these kids what receipts really cost," she said, and pulled the trigger. The outdoor range stretched across 2 miles of California desert. 5 shooting stations had been set up, each one progressively farther from the target line. The wind came in gusts that made the flags snap and dance. Heat shimmers rose from the sand, creating mirage effects that would confuse even the most sophisticated ballistic computers. Eleanor stood at the first station, her M40A3 resting on a bipod. The rifle was older than most of the candidates watching. 30 years of service had worn the bluing on the barrel and put scratches in the wooden stock. But the bore was pristine and the mechanical scope had been maintained with religious care. 20 yards to her left, Brecken Hastings set up his rifle. The contrast was stark. His weapon was a custom-built precision system that cost more than a new car. The stock was carbon fiber, nearly weightless. The barrel was free-floated and cold hammer forged. The scope was a digital marvel that connected wirelessly to a ballistic computer on his wrist. Wind sensors, temperature gauges, barometric pressure readings, real-time trajectory calculation. The rifle could practically shoot itself. The 22 SEAL candidates formed a loose gallery behind the shooting line. Commander Ashford stood with his arms crossed, watching. Garrett Wolfe held his brother's dog tags in one hand. Ainsley Hartwell had her notebook out, pen ready. The range officer, a grizzled Marine gunnery sergeant named Patterson, stepped forward. He was 62 years old, a lifer who had spent 4 decades on ranges like this. He'd seen every kind of shooter, the naturals, the hard workers, the lucky ones, and the legends. He had a feeling he was about to witness something that belonged in the last category. "Listen up," Patterson called out. 5 stages, distances from 800 to 1,800 yards. Wind is gusting 12 to 25 knots, possibly higher. Stationary and moving targets. 1 shot per stage. Closest to center wins each stage. He paused, looking between Eleanor and Brecken. "Before we begin, I want to make something clear. What you're about to attempt is extreme long-range precision under difficult conditions. Most combat snipers will never attempt shots like this. The longest confirmed kill in Marine Corps history is 2,500 yards. We're not going that far, but we're going far enough that luck becomes a factor." Eleanor spoke quietly. "Gunnery Sergeant Patterson, luck is what people call skill they don't understand." Patterson's weathered face cracked into a slight smile. "Yes, ma'am, I stand corrected." He raised his voice again. "Shooter's choice, who goes first?" Eleanor gestured to Brecken. "Youth before experience." Breck settled into position at the 800-yard line. His movements were textbook perfect. Proper stance, good bone support, controlled breathing. He pressed a button on his wrist computer and data began flowing to his scope. Wind speed, wind direction, temperature, humidity, barometric pressure. The ballistic computer crunched the numbers in milliseconds and displayed the firing solution directly in his sight picture. He made micro adjustments to his scope. Breathed in, breathed out halfway. Held, squeezed. The rifle barked. 800 yards downrange, a puff of dust appeared on the target face. Patterson raised his binoculars. 2 inches high, 1 inch right of center, he called. "Excellent shot." A few of the candidates clapped. Breck stood up, satisfied, but not cocky. The morning's lessons had burned away his arrogance like morning fog under California sun. Eleanor stepped to the line. She settled behind her rifle with movements so practiced they looked like meditation. No rush, no wasted motion. Just the slow, deliberate settling of someone who had occupied this position thousands of times across 4 decades. She looked downrange through her scope. Then she raised her head and simply watched. The mirage dancing above the berm, the sparse desert grass bending, the way dust devils formed and collapsed, the pattern of heat rising from different surfaces. She wasn't calculating. She was reading. The way you read a book, absorbing information without conscious translation. 30 seconds passed. A minute. One of the younger candidates shifted impatiently. Ainsley Hartwell shot him a look that could have frozen gasoline. Eleanor's breathing slowed, became rhythmic. 4 counts in, hold for 2, 6 counts out. The rhythm of a resting heartbeat, the rhythm of absolute calm. She looked through her scope again, made a single adjustment. 1 click, less than 1/4 of an inch of correction at this range. Her finger took up slack on the trigger. The squeeze was so smooth it looked like the rifle fired itself. The round left the barrel at 2,800 feet per second. It flew through 800 yards of dancing wind and heat shimmer and struck dead center of the 12-inch circle. Perfect center mass, Patterson called. There was a note in his voice that suggested he'd seen something he hadn't expected. The candidates murmured appreciation. Eleanor stood and stepped back from the rifle without comment. No celebration, no acknowledgement, just the quiet professionalism of someone doing what they'd always done. Patterson called the second stage. 1,000 yards, moving target, 18-inch rectangle traveling left to right at approximately 3 miles per hour, wind holding steady at 15 knots, one shot each. Moving targets were different mathematics. Lead time, prediction. The bullet would take 1.4 seconds to arrive. The target would move roughly 11 inches in that time. Add wind drift. Add the Coriolis effect at this range. Add the margin for human error. Breck's computer tracked the target automatically, calculated the lead, adjusted for every variable. The firing solution appeared in his scope, a small red dot showing exactly where to aim. He waited for the target to enter the predicted zone. Fired. The target continued moving for a fraction of a second. Then a hit indicator flashed. 4 inches left of center, Patterson announced. Solid hit on a moving target. The candidates nodded. That was impressive shooting, even with technology. Eleanor studied the target through her scope, watched it traverse from right to left, then reverse direction. Steady mechanical pace. No variation. She could see the rhythm. Her grandfather had taught her to shoot ducks on a frozen lake in Montana when she was 7 years old. Winter mornings so cold the gun oil would thicken. He'd said, don't aim where they are. Aim where they're going to be. Feel the speed. Become the speed. She'd killed her first duck at 7 years old with one shot. Hadn't missed since age 9. The same principle applied whether the target was a duck at 40 yards or a rectangle at 1,000. She led the target, felt the wind, became part of the system instead of trying to calculate it. Squeezed. The bullet flew. The target moved. They met at a point in space-time that looked like coincidence but was actually 43 years of understanding how movement works. The hit indicator flashed. 2 inches right of center, Patterson announced. His voice had changed. He was no longer just calling shots. He was witnessing something. Eleanor stepped back. Stage 2, she said quietly. Brecken Hastings was no longer casual. His jaw was set, his eyes focused. This wasn't supposed to be close. The old woman with the museum rifle was supposed to do respectably well, provide some wisdom, maybe land a few decent shots. She wasn't supposed to be winning. Third stage, Patterson called. His voice carried across the range. 1,200 yards. Stationary target, but we're adding complexity. 10-inch circle. Wind is variable, gusting between 12 and 22 knots. This is where technology should dominate, ladies and gentlemen. Variable wind is the nightmare scenario. One shot. This was Breck's element. Variable wind meant the computer could sample conditions dozens of times per second, average the chaos, provide a solution that accounted for maximum variance. He let the AI run its calculations. The numbers flickered on his display as the wind shifted. The solution stabilized. He waited for a moment when the wind matched the predicted average. Fired. 3 inches low, 2 inches left, Patterson called. Good shot under difficult conditions. Good, not great. The variable wind had pushed him off center despite the computer's best efforts. Eleanor didn't rush. She watched the wind flags at 200, 400, and 800 yards. They were telling 3 different stories. The wind wasn't just variable. It was turbulent, chaotic, following terrain features and temperature gradients that no algorithm could fully predict. She'd seen this before. Mountain ranges created wind patterns that seemed random, but actually followed the shape of the land. You couldn't calculate it with math. You had to feel it. Wait for the moment when chaos briefly organized into something coherent. She waited. 2 minutes. 3. Some of the candidates shifted impatiently. Ainsley Hartwell raised her hands slightly, silencing them without words. Then the flags aligned. For just a moment, all 3 pointed the same direction at the same angle. A brief window of coherence in the chaos. Eleanor fired into that window, dead center. Perfect, Patterson said. He wasn't hiding his surprise anymore. That's 3 for 3, ma'am. The candidates were talking now, excited murmurs running through the group. Ainsley was writing furiously. Garrett was smiling, his brother's dog tags catching the sunlight. Commander Ashford's expression was carefully neutral, but his eyes showed pride. Brecken recalibrated his rifle, checked his computer settings, ran diagnostics. He'd lost 3 straight stages to a woman old enough to be his grandmother using equipment that belonged in a museum. The thought didn't make him angry. It made him humble. and hungry to understand. Fourth stage, Patterson announced. 1,400 yards, 12-inch circle. Wind conditions are deteriorating. I'm seeing gusts up to 28 knots on the sensors. This is extreme difficulty. Breck took his time. Let the computer run multiple sampling cycles. The ballistic solution flickered, numbers changing as the wind shifted. He waited for a pattern, found a moment that looked stable. Fired. The round went long and right. 8 inches high, 6 inches right of center, Patterson called. Still within the circle. That's solid work in these conditions. Breck stood up, frustrated but not defeated. An 8-inch miss at 1,400 yards and 30-knot winds was actually respectable. Many snipers would have missed the target entirely. Eleanor took her position. 1,400 yards was a long way. At that distance, the bullet would drop over 200 inches from the bore line. Wind could push it 3 feet or more. Temperature, humidity, even the rotation of the earth became factors. She settled in, looked downrange. The wind was building, coming in waves. She could feel it on her face, each gust arriving with a slightly different temperature, a different pressure signature. The computer in Breck's rifle was trying to average all that chaos into a single number, a single firing solution. But wind wasn't average. It was a living thing, flowing and turbulent and patterned in ways that followed terrain and heat and pressure systems. Eleanor closed her eyes for just a moment, let herself feel it. The rhythm of the gusts, strong for 3 seconds. Softer for 2, strong again, a cycle buried in apparent chaos. She opened her eyes and fired immediately into the soft part of the cycle. The round flew true. Center mass. Perfect, Patterson said. His voice carried something close to awe now. 4 stages, 4 perfect shots. The gallery erupted. Candidates were cheering openly. Even those who had been skeptical this morning, who had maybe laughed at the old woman with the strange tattoos, they were believers now. Brecken Hastings stood very still, staring downrange. His rifle represented the cutting edge of technology, artificial intelligence, real-time data processing, predictive algorithms developed by teams of engineers and tested by the best shooters in the world. And he was losing to a 58-year-old woman who was reading the wind by feeling it on her skin. "How?" he said loud enough for everyone to hear. "How did you shoot that fast? My computer was still calculating wind variance." Eleanor looked at him with something like kindness. "Your computer was thinking, I was feeling. By the time the AI averaged all the wind data and gave you a solution, the conditions had already changed. I waited for a pattern I recognized and shot into it." She paused, making sure he understood this wasn't criticism. "But you're learning. Your shot was good. You kept it in the circle under conditions that would make most shooters miss the target entirely. That's skill. Give yourself credit." Patterson's voice cut through the moment, carrying a weight it hadn't held before. "Final stage." The range went quiet. 1,800 yards, that's over a mile. 10-inch circle, wind is now gusting to 30 knots. I'm going to be honest with you. This is at the edge of possible, even in good conditions. In this wind, it's going to be as much about timing as skill. He looked at both shooters. The rifle range ends at 2,000 yards. We set this target at 1,800 because that's the farthest we could safely go and still have reliable hit confirmation. This is extreme long-range precision. Most snipers will never attempt a shot like this in their entire careers. He paused, then added, "Ma'am, in 30 years of running this range, I've only seen 3 people hit this target. 2 of them were using 50 caliber rifles with computer-guided bullets. The third got lucky." Eleanor smiled slightly. "Then maybe today you'll see number 4. But before anyone could move to the firing line, Commander Ashford stepped forward. "Hold on," he said. His voice carried the weight of rank. "Before we shoot the final stage, I want to add something." The candidates turned to look at him. Ashford addressed Eleanor directly. "You came here today to prove a point. That experience matters. That fundamentals outlast technology. That an old rifle in the skilled hands can compete with the newest equipment." Eleanor nodded slowly. "You've proven that," Ashford continued. 4 perfect shots, but I want to add stakes to this final shot. Real stakes." Eleanor's eyes narrowed slightly. "What kind of stakes, Miles?" Ashford turned to address the entire group. "If Eleanor makes this shot, if she goes 5 for 5, perfect under these conditions, I'm authorizing full funding for her program. Not just the women's instructor program she proposed. I'm talking about establishing a formal course in fundamental precision shooting. No computers, no AI, just iron sights, mechanical scopes, and the skills that have kept snipers alive for a century." The candidates murmured. That was significant. A formal course meant curriculum, budget, permanent staff positions. Legacy. And if I miss, Eleanor asked. Ashford's face was grave. Then the program doesn't happen. We'll say thank you for your service, send you home, and rely on technology like everyone else. The weight of that settled over the range like a physical thing. Ainsley Hartwell looked stricken. Garrett Wolf's hand tightened on his brother's dog tags. Even Brecken, who had been competing, looked uncomfortable with the sudden pressure. Eleanor stood silent for a long moment. Her right hand, the one she used to pull, triggers trembled slightly. Arthritis. The inevitable cost of 58 years of living, 43 years of shooting. Some mornings she couldn't make a fist without pain. That's not fair, Miles, she said quietly. You're putting 47 women's futures on one shot. No, Ashford said. I'm putting it on the woman who made the longest confirmed kill in this theater at 1,723 yards. The woman who has 117 confirmed kills across 4 decades. The woman who never missed when it mattered. 117. The number hung in the air, more than most modern snipers would see in an entire career. Eleanor looked at her hands, looked at the rifle that had been with her for 30 years, looked at the target 1,800 yards away, barely visible even through magnification. Then she looked at Ainsley Hartwell, at the young woman who represented every female shooter who would come after, who had joined the SEALs because of an interview Eleanor gave 14 years ago, who needed this program to exist. All right, Eleanor said, let's make it interesting. She walked to the 1,800-yard line. Patterson was already there setting up the shooting position. The target looked impossibly small. The wind flags were dancing wildly. Brecken approached his own position. His ballistic computer was already running calculations. He watched the numbers scroll. Wind drift at this range with 30-knot gusts could push a bullet 3 feet or more off course. The computer cycled through possible solutions, each one flagged with probability percentages. The final recommendation appeared in red text. Probability of hit 22%. Wind variance too high. Recommend postponing attempt. Breck stared at the warning. Everything in his training said to trust the technology. The AI had processed more atmospheric data than his brain ever could. It was telling him the shot wasn't viable. But the old woman had beaten him 4 times in a row by ignoring exactly this kind of algorithmic caution. He made his decision, overrode the warning, took the shot the computer recommended. The rifle barked. 1,800 yards away, after a flight time of nearly 2 seconds, the bullet struck. 6 inches low, 7 inches right of center, Patterson called. That's a miss, outside the circle. Breck stood up slowly. He'd given it everything. The AI had provided its best solution. The conditions were just too extreme. A 6-inch miss at over a mile and 30-knot gusting winds was actually impressive. He'd exceeded the computer's 22% probability just by getting on the target. He looked at Eleanor, wanted to say something encouraging, wanted to tell her it was okay if she missed, that she'd already proven her point. But the words died in his throat when he saw her face. She wasn't looking at the target. She was looking at the sky, at something the rest of them couldn't see. Eleanor Vaughn was 58 years old. She had been shooting since she was 15. She had fired rifles on 6 continents. She had killed 117 people across 33 years of service. She had seen friends die, had made mistakes that cost lives, had carried guilt and grief and the weight of impossible decisions. All of that was in her eyes as she looked at the California sky and made peace with what came next. She settled behind the M40A3, the rifle that had been with her through Desert Storm, Mogadishu, Iraq, Afghanistan. The rifle that had no computer, no sensors, no artificial intelligence to whisper solutions, just steel and wood and glass and the fundamental laws of physics that had governed projectile motion since humans first threw stones. Eleanor looked through the scope. The target was so far away, it was barely a dot even at maximum magnification. The wind was chaos. The mirage was dancing. Every logical part of her brain said this shot was impossible. She raised her head, looked at the wind flags, then did something that made several candidates gasp. She closed her eyes. For 15 seconds, Eleanor sat behind her rifle with her eyes completely closed, her face tilted slightly toward the sun. Her breathing slowed, deepened, became something closer to sleep than alertness. She was feeling the wind, not calculating it, not measuring it, feeling it the way you feel music, letting it move through her instead of trying to capture it in numbers. The wind pushed against her left cheek harder than her right. It came in cycles. Strong for 3 seconds, softer for 2, strong again. The pattern wasn't random. It followed the terrain, the temperature, the pressure systems moving through the valley. 43 years of shooting, 58 years of living in a body that could feel temperature and pressure and movement. That was data no computer could quantify. Eleanor opened her eyes, looked through the scope one final time, made 3 clicks of adjustment, elevation, windage, a final half click that barely moved the reticle. She took a breath, let half of it out, found that perfect stillness between heartbeats where the body stops being flesh and becomes a machine of bone and sinew and pure intention. In that moment, Eleanor Vaughn wasn't thinking about the program, wasn't thinking about the 47 women who needed this to work, wasn't thinking about legacy or proving anything. She was simply doing what she had done 10,000 times before, reading the world, trusting her hands, making the shot. Her finger moved. The trigger broke clean. The rifle fired. The bullet left the barrel at 2,800 feet per second. It climbed on its arc, rising against gravity before physics pulled it back down. The wind pushed it left for the first 600 yards. A cross current caught it at 900, pushed it back right. At 1,200 yards, a thermal layer tried to lift it high, but the bullet's decreasing velocity meant the effect was less than predicted. At 1,500 yards, a gust tried to carry it off course, but Eleanor had fired between gusts using the brief moment of coherence. 1.8 seconds after Eleanor pulled the trigger, traveling at less than half its initial velocity, the bullet struck home. Patterson had his binoculars up. He stared through them for 3 full seconds, lowered them, looked again through his spotting scope, then keyed his radio. Downrange confirm impact location. Static crackled. Then a voice, center mass, Gunny. Dead center, perfect hit. Patterson lowered the radio very slowly. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Perfect. Then louder for everyone to hear. 5 stages, 5 perfect shots, 800 to 1,800 yards, in 30-knot gusting winds, with a 30-year-old rifle and iron sights. He turned to look at Eleanor. His weathered face showed something that might have been awe. Ma'am, in 30 years of running this range, I have never seen anyone shoot 5 for 5 perfect under these conditions. With any equipment. You just did something I didn't think was possible. The silence lasted for exactly 2 seconds. Then the range erupted. 22 SEAL candidates were on their feet cheering, shouting, several of them literally jumping up and down. Ainsley Hartwell was crying openly, not bothering to wipe her face. Garrett Wolfe was holding his brother's dog tags up to the sky like an offering. Commander Ashford was applauding with tears running down his face. Brecken Hastings stood completely still for a long moment. Then he walked over to Eleanor, stood at attention, and saluted. Ma'am, Breck said, his voice shaking with emotion, I apologize for the disrespect this morning, for the arrogance, for thinking I knew what excellence looked like. I was wrong about everything. Eleanor returned the salute crisp and proper. Then she did something unexpected. She smiled. You weren't wrong, Breck. You're an exceptional shooter. That shot you just made, keeping it on target at 1,800 yards in these conditions, 99% of snipers couldn't do it. You're going to be great at this. But you're better, Breck said. It wasn't bitter, it was honest. Right now, yes, Eleanor agreed, because I have something you can't buy and can't download. I have 58 years of living, 43 years of feeling wind on my face, 10,000 repetitions. That's experience. It compounds like interest in a bank account. Every shot teaches you something. After enough shots, you stop calculating and start knowing. She gestured to his rifle. That computer is incredible. It processes more data than I ever could, but it can't feel. It can't integrate 40 years of pattern recognition. It can't account for intuition built on a lifetime of practice. Eleanor stepped closer. Technology is a tool, a powerful tool. Use it, trust it, but understand its limits. The computer told you not to take that last shot, didn't it? Breck nodded. 22% probability. Recommended postponing. And you shot anyway. That was human judgment overriding the machine. That was you understanding that sometimes impossible odds are still worth taking. Keep developing that judgment. It's more valuable than any rifle. She gripped his shoulder. 30 years from now, you'll be better than I am. You'll have technology I can't imagine, plus the experience I have now. That's how progress works. Each generation builds on the last. That's why teaching matters more than doing. Breck's eyes were wet. Ma'am, would you train me? Not officially, I know the program is for retired female veterans. But could I learn from you the fundamentals? The old ways. The things computers can't teach. Eleanor considered. Every Tuesday evening, 7 to 9 p.m., the program meets here. You can join us for the last hour. We'll work on reading conditions without technology. Deal. Yes, ma'am, I'll be here. Thank you. Commander Ashford approached, his face split by a grin wider than anyone had seen in years. He said, that was the most incredible shooting I've ever witnessed. The program is approved, full funding. You can start as soon as you're ready. Eleanor nodded, but something in her expression was distant. She was looking past Ashford, past the celebrating candidates, to something only she could see. Miles, she said quietly, can we talk alone? They walked away from the group toward the edge of the range, where the desert stretched out toward distant mountains. When they were far enough away, Eleanor spoke. I almost missed, she said. Ashford looked at her sharply. But you didn't. I almost did. My hands are going miles. Arthritis. Some mornings I can't hold a coffee cup without shaking. I got lucky today. The wind aligned. The conditions gave me one perfect window. I took it. But I can't count on luck forever. You're not retiring, Ashford's voice carried alarm. No, but I'm moving to teaching full-time. No more demonstrations. No more proving I can still do it. Today was my last shot. I want to go out perfect. She touched the tattoos on her arm one after another. The candle, the hourglass, the X, the footprints, the coordinates. Each one a memory, each memory a lesson. Every mark tells a story, Miles. Today I finished the last chapter. Now I teach the next generation to write their own. Ashford nodded slowly. The program starts when? 3 weeks. I need time to set up curriculum, recruit instructors, find the women who served and then disappeared. You'll find them. They're out there, waiting to be seen again. They walked back to the group together. The candidates were still celebrating, but when they saw Eleanor approaching, they quieted down. Respect, not fear. Admiration, not worship. The kind of quiet that comes when you're in the presence of mastery and you know it. Garrett Wolfe approached, still holding his brother's dog tags. Ma'am, he said, my parents, they live in San Diego. They've been asking to meet you ever since I told them I found you. Could I bring them here tomorrow? Maybe they need to hear about Caleb. They need to know what really happened. Eleanor's expression softened. Of course, Garrett. Bring them tomorrow. 1400 hours. I'll tell them everything. Garrett's face broke into a smile of pure relief. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. Ainsley Hartwell was next. Ma'am, you said I could join the program after I complete SEAL training. I meant it. I want to be part of this. I want to learn to teach. I'm counting on you, Ainsley. You're going to be one of my lead instructors. The fundamentals program needs someone who can bridge the gap between traditional marksmanship and modern operations. That's you. I won't let you down. I know you won't. The candidates began to disperse, heading back toward the main building. Their conversations were animated, excited, transformed. They'd come here thinking they knew what excellence looked like. They were leaving with a different understanding. Eleanor stayed at the range a few minutes longer, alone with her rifle and her thoughts and the California sun warming her shoulders. She touched each tattoo one more time, traced the candle flame, the hourglass sand, the X-shaped scar, the small footprints, the GPS coordinates, and finally the word home over her heart. Tomorrow would begin something new. But today she closed a chapter, 5 perfect shots, 117 confirmed kills across a lifetime, 43 years of service, 33 years in uniform, and now the chance to pass it all forward. Eleanor Vaughn picked up her rifle and walked toward the building. Behind her, the wind kept blowing across the empty range. The targets stood silent. The flags danced, but the lesson remained. 3 months later, Eleanor stood in front of 18 women at a shooting range in Virginia, former Marine snipers, Army-designated marksmen, Navy specialists, women who had served with distinction and then retired to find themselves invisible, forgotten. Society had looked at them and seen grandmothers, not warriors. Eleanor understood. She'd felt it herself. You're here because you have knowledge that's dying, she told them. Skills that took decades to develop. Experience that can't be replicated in a classroom or downloaded from the internet. You're here because I need you. These young shooters coming up, they have the best technology in the world, but they don't have wisdom. That's what you give them. The women listened, some crying, some nodding, all of them sitting straighter than they had in years. One raised her hand. Captain Sarah Morrison, retired. Army, 53 years old, 82. Confirmed kills across 2 decades in Iraq and Afghanistan. Ma'am, why us? Why not active duty instructors? Because active duty is still doing, Eleanor said. You're past doing. You're ready to teach. There's a difference. When you're still operational, you teach the way you shoot. Fast, efficient, get the job done. But when you retire, you have time to think about why things work. to understand the principles underneath the techniques. That's what makes great instructors. She paused, making sure they understood. You're not here because you failed. You're here because you succeeded, and now you have something more valuable than skill. You have perspective. Over the next 2 months, Eleanor trained those 18 women to become instructors. They learned curriculum development, teaching methodology, how to break down complex skills into teachable components, how to meet students where they were and take them where they needed to go. Breck and Hastings joined them every Tuesday evening as promised. At first, the retired female veterans were skeptical. What was this young hotshot SEAL doing in their classroom? But Breck showed up with humility and a notebook. He asked questions, he took corrections, he practiced the fundamentals like a beginner, even though he'd graduated top of his class. After 6 weeks, Captain Morrison pulled Eleanor aside. "That kid is special," she said. "He's going to be one of the great ones." "I know," Eleanor said. "That's why I'm teaching him." Garrett Wolfe brought his parents as promised. They sat in Eleanor's small office at the range for 3 hours while she told them about Caleb, about his skill, his courage, his sacrifice. She showed them the GPS coordinates tattooed on her leg, explained the shot she'd made because of his data. Caleb's mother, a woman named Margaret with gray hair, and Caleb's same eyes held Eleanor's hand and said, "Thank you for bringing our boy back to us. Not his body, we buried that, but his story, who he really was." She paused, then added, "When Garrett told us you were teaching women to be instructors, I knew Caleb would have loved that. He always said the best warriors were the ones who made other people better." Eleanor felt something settle in her chest. A weight she'd carried for 13 years finally shared and therefore lighter. 6 months after the shooting demonstration, Commander Ashford visited the program. He watched Eleanor teach a class on reading mirage. Watched her students, these retired warriors, practice the ancient art of seeing heat shimmer and translating it into wind direction. "You've built something special here," he told her afterward. "It's not just me," Eleanor said. "It's every woman in that room. Each one has something unique to teach. I'm just organizing it." "How many students have you trained so far?" 47 women have gone through the instructor course. They're now teaching at bases across the country. We've trained over 200 active duty snipers in fundamental marksmanship. Ashford smiled. "The program is exceeding projections. Pentagon wants to expand it, make it mandatory for all Scout sniper schools." Eleanor nodded slowly. "That's good. That means it outlasts me. You planning on going somewhere?" "Not yet, but I'm 58 years old, Miles. I won't be here forever. When I go, the program has to stand on its own." 9 months after starting the program, Eleanor received a call from her son Michael, her oldest, the one who had been most distant since his father's death. "Mom," he said, "I saw an article about your program in Marine Corps Times. They called you a legend." Eleanor was quiet, not sure where this was going. Michael continued, his voice thick. "I'm sorry for not understanding, for treating you like you were broken. Dad's death, your PTSD, I thought you needed to be protected. I didn't see that you needed to be needed." "Michael, let me finish. I want to bring the kids to visit. Let them meet their grandmother, the real one, the one who served, who did impossible things, who's teaching the next generation." "Can we come?" Eleanor felt tears building. "Yes, please come." They visited 2 weeks later, Michael, his wife Jennifer, and their 2 children, 7-year-old Emma and 5-year-old Jack. Emma asked, "Grandmama, what are all those pictures on your arms?" Eleanor sat with her granddaughter and told her about the tattoos, age-appropriate versions, the candle for remembering, the hourglass for patience, the footprints for teaching, the word home for finding purpose. "Why do you teach people to shoot?" Emma asked. "Because knowledge is like a fire," Eleanor said. "If you keep it to yourself, it dies when you do. But if you share it, it spreads. It keeps burning even after you're gone. That's what teaching is, keeping the fire alive." Jack, the 5-year-old, looked up at her with serious eyes. "Are you a hero, Grandma?" Eleanor thought about that, about Lebanon, Desert Storm, Mogadishu, Afghanistan, 117 confirmed kills, 47 women trained as instructors, hundreds of students taught. "No," she said gently. "Heroes are people who do something once. I just kept showing up. That's all service is. Showing up every day and doing the work." But she smiled because Jack's question meant her story would continue. Her grandchildren would know her as something more than a damaged woman with nightmares. They'd know her as someone who served, who taught, who mattered. 1 year after the shooting demonstration, Eleanor stood at the same range in Coronado. The program had grown beyond anything she'd imagined. 62 retired female veterans now served as instructors across 23 military bases. The curriculum had been adopted as official training for Marine Corps Scout snipers. Brecken Hastings was there now, an instructor himself teaching a class of new SEAL candidates the fundamentals Eleanor had taught him. Ainsley Hartwell had completed SEAL training and joined the program full-time. She was Eleanor's deputy handling logistics and curriculum development. Garrett Wolfe had transferred to the instructor cadre. He taught combat fieldcraft using lessons his brother Caleb had taught him. Eleanor walked the range one more time, touched the firing line where she'd made those 5 perfect shots. The day that had changed everything. Commander Ashford found her there. "Thinking about doing it again?" he asked, teasing. "No," Eleanor said. "That was my last demonstration. I went out perfect. That's enough. The program is self-sustaining now. You know that, right? Even if you stopped tomorrow, it would continue." "I know, that's the point. Legacy isn't about being irreplaceable. It's about building something that doesn't need you." She looked at Ashford with clear eyes. "I came back because I was dying from invisibility. You saw me, gave me purpose. Now I've passed that purpose to 62 other women who were dying the same way. They're passing it to hundreds of students. The fire is spreading miles. That's all I ever wanted." Ashford nodded. "You did good, Elle. You did real good." 3 years after starting the program at age 61, Eleanor Vaughn passed away peacefully in her sleep. She died at her ranch in Montana, surrounded by her students who had become like daughters. Her actual sons were there too, holding her hands, finally understanding who their mother had always been. The funeral was held at Arlington National Cemetery with full military honors. 62 female veteran instructors attended wearing their dress uniforms with pride. Hundreds of students came active duty shooters whose lives had been changed by her teaching. Brecken Hastings gave the eulogy. He talked about a morning when he'd been arrogant and dismissive, about 5 perfect shots that had humbled him, about Tuesday evenings learning to read the wind by feeling instead of calculating. "She taught me that excellence isn't about being the best," Breck said, his voice carrying across the cemetery. "It's about being willing to teach the next person how to be better than you were. That's what Eleanor did. She made us all better." Ainsley Hartwell spoke next, talked about seeing Eleanor as a role model before they'd ever met, about joining the SEALs because of one interview, about learning that teaching was harder and more important than doing. Garrett Wolfe stood at the grave with his parents. He didn't speak, but he placed his brother's dog tags on the casket next to Eleanor's medals. The two warriors reunited at last. The Marine Corps Museum created a permanent exhibit, Eleanor Vaughn, the marked instructor. Her M40A3 rifle was displayed under glass. Next to it were 6 photographs, each showing one of her tattoos, each with a caption explaining the story. The candle: "For the 241 Marines I couldn't save." The hourglass: "For the 47 hours I waited in the desert." The X: "For the shot I missed and the men who died." The footprints: "For the students who walk forward in my place." The coordinates: "For the impossible shot that human judgment made possible." The word home: "For finding purpose again when the world tried to make me invisible." Below the displays a single quote: "Excellence isn't about being the best. It's about teaching the next person to be better than you were." That's legacy. That's immortality. That's what the marks really mean. Eleanor Vaughn, 1968 to 2029. The program she founded continued, grew, evolved. Within 5 years, over 300 female veterans had been trained as instructors. Within 10 years, the fundamentals course had become mandatory for all military precision shooters. And every Tuesday evening, at ranges across the country, retired warriors gathered to teach, to pass forward what they'd learned, to keep the fire burning. Because Eleanor Vaughn had shown them that invisibility wasn't inevitable, that age wasn't irrelevance, that knowledge had value, that teaching was service, that legacy outlasted life. 50 years later, when military historians studied the evolution of sniper training, they pointed to a single moment as the turning point. An afternoon in Coronado when a 58-year-old woman with a 30-year-old rifle made 5 perfect shots in 30-knot winds. Not because the shots were impossible, though they nearly were, but because those shots prove that experience compounds, that wisdom outlasts technology, and that sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one who has the most to teach. Eleanor Vaughn had found her way home, not to a place, to a purpose. And in doing so, she'd shown hundreds of others how to find theirs. The marks on her skin had been receipts from a life that mattered, proof that she had paid the price, earned the wisdom, and passed it forward. That was enough. That was everything. That was home.